Good afternoon, everyone. I'm so happy to have you all with us today. Of course, this is a difficult time, but I think that nonetheless, it is important to start to try to get into a certain routine. So we are here as part of our annual online lectures on oral history in partnership between the Leo Baeck Institute, the Oral History Division at the Hebrew University, and the Israeli Association for Oral History. And today we have two guests, and let me please introduce them and give the floor to them. So Dr. Emma Zohar. Emma is a postdoctoral fellow at the Interdisciplinary Unit for Polish Studies at the University of Haifa. She completed her PhD in 2019 at the Department of Jewish History and Contemporary Jewry at the Hebrew University. She was a postdoctoral fellow at the Max Planck Institute for Human Development, the Center for History of Emotions in Berlin. The NAWA visiting lecturer at the Copernicus University Torun, and a visiting researcher at the Oxford Center for Hebrew and Jewish Studies. Her current project, Within the Pale of Pleasure, Polish Jews and the Pursuit of Happiness, 1918 to 1939, deals with the everyday life practices of Polish Jewry in independent Poland. And our second guest is Jakub, and I practiced on it, so I'm hoping to do it correctly. Jakub Galeziowski, social and oral historian with a focus on Polish history of the Second World War and its consequences. In 2021, he received a PhD in history from the University of Augsburg and the University of Warsaw for his dissertation about Polish children born of war, currently affiliated with the University of Warsaw, where he teaches oral history and biographical methods. Is the author of numerous articles in these research fields, as well as in social history, co-founder of the Polish Oral History Association and its president. Emma and Jakub, the floor is yours.
Is Emma there?
Okay.
Yeah. So should I start?
Sure.
Okay. Thank you very much for a very kind invitation, and that you, Ronnie, and your team, you really made it that we could meet in these difficult times. I'm very honored to have this possibility to talk to this audience and to you. And present some our developments and achievements in the field of oral history in Poland. We met with Ronnie in London last year, I think. No, this year, I think, at the beginning of this year, and we decided that it's a good reason to make any kind of connection and collaboration. And I think that this is the first step we just have done. And what I wanted to say, I think that then very smoothly we moved to a conversation with Emma. But at first, I would like to make a little kind of introduction. I called it kind of peculiarities of oral history in Poland. And then when I finish, I would like to share some links to show you. Most of them are in English, so you can just, in your free time after the seminar, you can just go Google and read what we are doing and check it what I'm talking about. So let's start. I think that at the beginning it's important to mention that that the Polish oral history has tangled roots. Very few historians who in the late 60s and early 70s began to use personal accounts with participants in past events did so outside the oral history framework. Around the same time, historian Krystyna Kersten encouraged to expand the scientific craft of historians with methods appropriate to social science and psychology. In her methodological proposal, many Polish oral historians seek legitimacy for oral history in the historiography. Kersten's methodological suggestions, however, were somewhat ahead of the era. In the time of groundbreaking theoretical and methodological debates in the humanities and social sciences in the West in late 70s and early 80s, anti-communist opposition activists gathered in Poland, gathered around the underground journal Karta, noted the need of registering the experiences of then marginalized groups. Former Siberian exiles, residents of the former Eastern borderlands, and opposition activists. In the late 80s, people from Karta milieu, mainly volunteers, without special training, reached the farthest corners of Poland to listen to stories heretofore hidden in families. The interviews recorded on the tapes became the core of two collections known as the Eastern Archive and the Opposition Archive. Today, both collections are available at the Oral History Archive in a digital version, in the biggest oral history archive in Warsaw and in Poland, in the History Meeting House. Thus, at the beginning, the first methodologically unaware practitioners of oral history considered the story they heard as evoked sources, intended, like all other historical sources, to be subject to criticism, but in practice used as an illustration or confirmation of this put forward. The second set themselves the goal of bearing witness to historical truth, stored in individual and family memory and publicly concealed and or covered up. One and the other neither called what they were doing oral history, nor placed it in a broader theoretical and methodological perspective. The same happened with both testimonies, oral and then transcribed and written, submitted to various commissions documenting Nazi crimes or at memorial sites, and with texts sent to famous diary competitions. In all the above-mentioned sources, all cultural texts, today one sees the products of oral history. Pioneering scholarly works, consciously referring to oral history methodology, appeared in Poland much later, in the early 2000s, as did the first archives that included a reference to oral history in their names. The first and still the largest oral history archive of the Karta Center and the History Meeting House took over the collections of interviews recorded back in the late 80s and early 90s. Other institutions recorded accounts of participants in historical events, as it were, starting from nothing. Like Sorry?
You can continue. I will.
Like, for example, Warsaw Uprising Museum, they have their own collections of oral histories. Both the first collections of interviews, as well as those yet to be created, set a pattern reproduced and practiced to this day by most institutions collecting oral accounts, mostly life stories and memoirs of people who lived through the 20th century, and among them primarily those repressed by both totalitarian systems, Nazism and communism, then also survivors and witnesses of the Holocaust. The focus of these groups of interviewees has contributed to a peculiar feature of Polish oral history that distinguishes it from the oral history in other, mostly Western countries, which concentrates on other social categories such as gender, class, and color. Remaining outside subsequent turns in the humanities and social science was largely due to the long isolation of Polish researchers. In contrast, the civic educational character of oral history had much more in common with parallel initiatives throughout the Central and Eastern European region. On this side of the Iron Curtain, it valued a version of history that was in opposition to official historiography, and after the fall of communism, it contributed to the construction of a post-communist collective memory. The gap between personal experience and the official account of the events of the recent past highlighted the need to collect and preserve eyewitness accounts pointing to an alternative version of history. As a result, oral history in this region was in its origin political history, because the demand to give voice to excluded groups, one of the foundations of oral history, meant, unlike in Western democratic countries, giving voice to representatives of political, intellectual, and cultural elites who were repressed, marginalized, or banned in the dominant discourse. Even today, the central themes in the numerous oral history projects remains World War II and its consequences, although now only from the children's perspective. Wartime and immediate post-war themes dominate in projects carried out by both the largest cultural institutions, like mentioned History Meeting House in Warsaw, the Grodzka Gate Theatre in Lublin, the Memory and Future Center in Wrocław, or Zamenhof Center in Białystok, as well as smaller initiatives in the fields of so-called community archiving, which for less than a decade has been animated by Karta Center, and since 2020 by the Center of Community Archives. We call it Centrum Archiwistyki Społecznej. Other topics, if they occasionally appear, are exceptions to this rule, although an inevitable change in this trend is to be expected due to the passing the oldest wartime generations of Polish citizens. In the first decade of the 21st century, one can observe an oral history boom in Poland, which continues to this day. Interviews are being recorded, usually with so-called witness to history, in numbers that no one has control over. Researchers representing various disciplines in the humanities and social sciences, employees of cultural institutions, activists from NGOs, social archivists, and students do interview intensively. Smaller or larger collections of such accounts are being created for a variety of uses, most often of a documentary and popularizing nature, as well as local oral history archives. In this context, by contrast, the results of the researchers' work were by far the least visible, which, if they were published, were often under labels other than oral history, since the prestige of the latter in academia was and still is scarce. And its status is still unclear. And for example, sometimes it still happens that many historians, as I call like the traditional historians, if they use the term oral history, they always write it in quotation marks, so not treat them so seriously. Authors of books refer to oral history with a kind of embarrassment, thus marginalizing its relevance to the results of their own research. In Poland, too, oral history is still taught at a smaller number of universities, and that too on the basic level. It means how to do interviews, and just stop here. Since the turn of the first and second decade of 21st century, one can speak also of a kind of institutionalization of oral history in Poland. In 2009, the Polish Oral History Association, Polskie Towarzystwo Historii Mówionej, PTHM, was founded, which was born out of the need to provide a formal framework for the developing and diverse activity of oral history practitioners. The association aims to improve the methodological and ethical standards of oral history as a field of academic study, culture, and social activity. Representatives of various academic disciplines, including historians and sociologists, as well as activists working in cultural institutions and NGOs, have gained a platform for gathering and cooperation. 2 years later, 2011, the first issue of the Wrocław Yearbook of Oral History came out so far, the only academic journal devoted exclusively to oral history. And some few words about our association, which has already 15 years of operating. It has around, at the moment, 80 members, but of course our events are also directed to wider public, like for example workshops, open lectures. And for example, so far, for example, the number of Facebook followers is exceeded 1,500. So it's this kind of audience we try to direct. We meet regularly 1 time per year in various places in Poland, providing workshops for members and together with the General Assembly. We developed trainings schemes, as well as developed ethical recommendations for just like a normal time and like interviewing in normal time, but also another version or updated version how to do interviews and how to deal with oral history during the pandemic, and even now recently in terms of ongoing conflicts. And the war in Ukraine encouraged us to also think what should we do during such conflicts, and how we should manage with oral history. And so this is a kind of, I would say, introduction to what is going on in very general way in Poland in terms of oral history. Our activity, I'd say, and maybe this is the good moment to mention it at the first time, that our activity was somehow noted by the international community of oral historians, which sign is, for example, this, that in 2 years, so in 2025, we will host the International Oral History Conference. So this biennial, the biggest oral history conference. And so this is the first moment I would like to all of you to invite to Kraków. Please follow our website. There will be probably the call for papers in early spring, so in March or April. And I hope that at least some of you will join us in Kraków in 2 years. So this is the kind of the first introduction. The next topic, I don't know, Emma, if we could smoothly go to the methodological issues and entanglements, or
yeah, whatever you feel like. I'm collecting my questions, and
your
then
questions.
maybe afterwards,
so let's do it maybe in this way, that
yeah.
because it's not too much, and in terms of some peculiarities and specificities of Polish oral history, maybe it's good to continue, and then in the end I just show some links, yeah, just to not forget about it. So I wanted also say something about methodology and kind of entanglements of oral history and biographical method, which I think it's quite, or it's not very usual for oral history field in various countries. Maybe I start with this, that it's no coincidence that the first research project in biographical sociology carried out in Poland after 1989, using the method of autobiographical interviewing by Fritz Schütze, precisely concerned the wartime experiences of Poles. The accounts recorded at the time are today fantastic historical source, and from today's perspectives, are even closer to oral history and are used by oral historians. Thanks to the establishment of the qualitative data archive, these materials have been digitized and are available to other researchers. In addition to research interests, many other common features link Polish biographical researchers to oral historians. One of them is the experience of functioning outside the scientific mainstream. The center of Polish biographical research is considered to be Łódź, where since the 80s, thanks to cooperation with German sociologists, numerous projects have been carried out, as well as workshops and seminars organized. It was Fritz Schütze whose original method of autobiographical narrative interview inspired not only sociologists, but it's their influence on Polish oral history that remains significant. It is worth mentioning that the adaptation by Carta Center of an interview technique based on the most important assumptions proposed by Fritz Schütze made this method the leading one among Polish oral history practitioners in general, as for years Carta was a leader in developing oral history projects in Poland. And this is very important, that by default, when we think about interviews, oral history interviews in Poland, we think about biographical interviews. So this is the main method, and very often it is connected with Fritz Schütze method. It, of course, resulted in a kind of methodological confusion, culminating in the already anecdotal attempt to make Fritz Schütze a pioneer of oral history in Poland. The researcher himself, of course, distanced himself from this idea because he doesn't call himself oral historian, of course. The process of convergence of the two fields of research has been fostered by the mutual relations between scholars and activists that have been maintained at various levels. These relations are also slowly becoming a subject for theoretical reflection, both in the scientific text as well as in joint initiatives. Although it's much less likely to find text by sociologists in our journal, Oral History Journal, because they use separate communication channels for presenting results of their research, they presents at annual workshops for members of our associations, as well as scientific conferences, is always generous. It's necessary to mention that, the approaches of oral historians and the biographical researchers also on many issues differ. This includes the ethics of research, the legal status of materials acquired, or they are archiving for later use. More recently, there has been a change in this divergence. This is caused partly because of deepening methodological reflection and partly due to changing requirements for scientific research with humans. In this case, interviews with representatives of usually vulnerable groups. Thus, it is becoming standard not only to obtain written consents from interviewees for their participation in the research and the use of their accounts, but also a top-down, mostly from the grant providers, requirement to archive the data and disseminate the outcomes of research. One of the visible results of these changes is the above-mentioned qualitative data archive, which collects empirical materials both from past sociological research and acquires new collections. To some extent, the creators of this platform were inspired by the Polish oral history archives, especially the oral history archive in History Meeting House, operating successfully in the public space. But of course, there are some disappointments and challenges here. Because it can be considered that oral history is doing well in Poland, and all that is needed is for practitioners of it to go with the stream. However, reading various articles, like recently published in Poland, provokes one to think, are we really going in the right direction? These contributions, above all, are testimonies to disillusionment, which follow their earlier enthusiasm for the possibilities offered by oral history. One of the main problems diagnosed by the authors, but also in our association, is the uncontrolled proliferation of existing oral history archives, the emergence of new collections with recordings, and the simply incomprehensible number of accounts, often of a poor quality. In their view, and in my opinion, it's still the case, there is a lack of an idea how to manage the obtained collections, which are lost in digital repositories, paradoxically, falling silent and into oblivion. I think contrary to the intentions of their creators, who probably had a mission to save from forgetting the accounts of witness to history. A dramatic question was even asked about the purpose of the documentation efforts undertaken in a situation where the recorded voice is becoming unheard of. For example, when there are archives with thousands of recordings and many of them are not processed. Yeah, it's difficult even in search in those archives. One of the consequences of this process, among others, is the duplication of interviews with the same interviewees. It turns out that it's easier to interview a person once again than to attempt to locate and use those accounts already recorded. Unfortunately, not always archived or left somewhere in the shelves or so on. In order for this trend to be reversed, one of the tasks facing our association is to take active steps to present existing oral history archives in Poland and promote the potential of existing interview collections and encourage their use in research. A separate issue, however, remains the availability of interviews recorded for individual scientific research for the possible reanalysis. And probably we know, and I don't know, maybe in Israel it's the same, that most researchers keep their interviews in their wardrobes or somewhere, and it's not possible to reuse those sources. It is the use of collected accounts for scientific purposes that has raised and currently raises the most doubts in the Polish academic community. This practice is rare in Poland, among other reasons, due to the lack of methodological patterns. Indeed, it must be said that oral history is no single methodology for analyzing interviews in general, and the interpretative efforts undertaken are generally linked to the disciplinary background of the researchers themselves and the research tradition which they identify. Sociologists look at interviews differently. Obviously, anthropologists and historians treat them differently, just to name representatives of some disciplines. While the factual layer recorded in the recordings is of little concern to social and cultural researchers, many historians question the value of oral accounts, while recognizing as historical source other ego documents or even court testimonies, in textual form, of course. This skepticism has a direct impact on analysis, since for most historians, if they do refer to interviews, it involves a compulsion to verify the information they hear with other written sources. Perhaps the reason for this distance is what is kind of glorification of the figure of the witness to history and transferring of his or her account to the rank of testimony, not being subject to the moral judgment. Such an attitude can contradict the mission of the historian, who is obliged to maintain scientific rigor and kind of suspicion towards sources. However, one may ask whether it's indeed the task of historian to adopt the attitude of a prosecutor, or perhaps wishing to use a repository of sources expanded by oral accounts, one should agree that the optimal interpretative framework for them is the concept of shared authority, solidly rooted in the theoretical reflection in oral history. In my view, it avoids the dissonance between commitments to witness expectations and methodologically grounded analysis. However, this is possible under the assumption that oral history can only enrich historiography. So in what direction should oral history in Poland develop further? On the one hand, I would refer to oral history as a method of producing empirical materials for scientific research, depending on the discipline, characterized by its own peculiarities. As a result, the different deliverables are produced, which can be treated differently by researchers, including as a historical source or narrative, and analyzed separately depending on the research purpose. This method should be taught at universities and practiced by researchers not only at the basic level, but also as a tool for study of both the past and present. One platform from joint efforts in this regard is oral history seminars we established last semester at University of Warsaw, where researchers from different disciplines collectively analyze interviews presented by one of their own, create joint multidisciplinary projects, and expand the scope of theoretical and methodological reflection in the form of new scholarly text. And then when maybe we can come back to this phenomena, I would say, because they are very successful seminars when people really started to analyze interviews together, and this is something, a kind, I would say, new quality and new chapter in our association, but also in our community of oral historians. On the other hand, there would be oral history in its kind of radical version as a public history, a primarily participatory ethical endeavor. And in this case, different varieties of it coexist. From the testimonies of people taking part in important historical events, victims persecuted by political systems, to the accounts of subjects marginalized in public discourse and excluded in various ways from local communities or entire societies. This formula of documentary activity is used by both cultural and educational institutions and NGOs. The common denominator for them is giving voice to the voiceless, as postulated Paul Thompson. So the goal of these activities is primarily ethical, empowerment and appreciation of heretofore undervalued, ignored, or even humiliated representatives of various groups and communities and rescuing forgotten stories from the past. The Polish Oral History Association should be the hub of all initiatives and kind of umbrella for institutions, organizations, individuals, researchers, and activists who practice oral history. In this way, it could initiate debates relevant to all of these entities, as well as those for particular audiences. It should also encourage scholars, especially young scholars, to use oral sources. And here I wanted to mention one example, what we started recently also. There are some kind of competitions for the best bachelor or master thesis, which uses oral histories. And I think that it's kind of encouragement of young scholars to really use not only interview people, but also use oral history archives for their academic texts. So this is maybe in very general what I wanted to say. Very briefly, what's going on in Polish oral history, like. And just to give you some examples, maybe I could for 1 or 2 minutes just share the screen. Yeah, can I do it here? And invite you to look at our website at first. From this year, we have the English version of our website, so you can easily navigate here and read what we are doing. Yeah, there are some like, yeah, this is the concourse. It means the competition of oral history, and yeah, the Jocha conference in Krakow, what's going on in our associations. And here are also recommendations, which also everybody's invited to read and follow. They are like these general ethical recommendations, these pandemic recommendations, yeah, and war testimonies. So it's everything available. You can do this. The second thing I wanted to just a second. I lost it. Yeah. I've lost it. But yeah, this what I wanted to show you. It's also the website of our journal. So again, the journal is at least this year and the next 2 years, it will be published fully in English. So again, everybody is invited to publish. If you consider to have an article or essay in oral history or about oral histories, just please follow the website. It's all open access, so you can read all the texts and also publish in this periodical. Yeah, I stop here, and Emma probably has some questions.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Jakub. Can you please just stop? Oh, perfect. Can you all hear me? Yeah, because I'm not from my own computer and I feel a bit lost. Can you hear me? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Perfect. So I think that maybe the first question that popped into my mind is just in the beginning you mentioned that the first initiation of oral history in Poland was completely different from other countries, and I'm quite like understood that the political situation influenced on the way that biographies and I was wondering is how this situation influenced on the way that you create history in Poland.
I had a little stop of the connection. I don't know if you had, and could you repeat only the question? Emma?
Yeah, I think that Emma has trouble with Emma. We were not able to hear a small part of the question. So can you repeat it?
Yeah, where did you lost me?
Only on the question, not the introduction to the question, but just the real question.
So what I was wondering is how it influenced the way that how it influenced the way that you wrote create history. Can you?
Yeah, I think that this is your question. So, but you mean how collecting or registering memories or stories in 80s, for example, influenced creating the history?
Yes.
I think that for many years, even I'd say decades, it has no influence because it was like kind of independent movement. The Carta Center until the 1989 was the underground opposition movement. So they did it, just for them. And I remember some stories from my elderly colleagues that they, had to hide the tapes somewhere that nobody could find them, and so on and so on and so on. Because usually they collected stories with people who and stories about family histories. They couldn't be heard, publicly. That way tabooed. Yeah, this Eastern experience. So everything was hidden, and of course they published some text in the periodical Carta. But it's obvious that it was kind of, I'd say, kind of elite periodical. Not many exemplars of them, and it's very limited public who could read those texts. And for many years they were not publicly available. Yeah, and historians, I'd say, they never used those sources. Yeah, even after I think that the change of 1989 and the open of new archives, like the archives of secret services or so on, now called the IPN. Yeah, directed the attention of historians to completely different sources, which also have been hidden, yeah, publicly not available, and all the research was connected with all these, these sources, and not experiences of ordinary people. And
so we can say that in a way it was some kind of alternative history.
Of course, it was kind of alternative history. And, could you imagine that only in early 2000s, the recordings were digitized and made publicly available. So, they were hidden for many years. Yeah, it's fantastic that the people's stories were recorded and it was possible, to digitize those old tapes. But still, there was no reaction, no cooperation. Nobody used it. Yeah, apart of some articles in Carta periodical. Yeah, for many years.
And this transformation, or the boom that you refer after during the 90s, can you find that the same events or the same person already been recorded, they kind of showed again in those late initiatives, or was it just new completely new narratives that were documented?
I think that in late 90s, in some circles, I'd say, but it's again very much connected with some intellectuals in Warsaw, in Krakow, in Gdańsk, in Lublin, yeah, who, for example, started, and I think that it's quietly connected or very much connected with also the with Jewish history, yeah, that they started to discover that something was before in their places, and maybe we should search for something and try to connect to people. So this is the story, for example, of Lublin and Grodzka Gate, Brama Grodzka, yeah, the Jewish Lublin, the story of Sejny, the center Pogranicze, yeah. And these were topics. I would say that this was the beginning of the new of creating new narratives, or kind of enlightenment that, oh, we had the history before and we should do something like this, because all, you know, real and very all real historians, they do, you know, only IPN or the, you know, the Secret Service sources, yeah. And then it was this, I would say that this kind of focus on communities. So the pre-war history, the Jewish history, and the history of communities. So this is late 90s, and then it really you know, exploded today, I'd say, yeah, that when I mentioned the Center for Community Archives, that's in under this umbrella, at this moment we have around 700 of little community archives around Poland, yeah, who do the local oral histories, or and not only oral history, because also they collect photographs and so on, but mainly it's based on oral history. So it's a kind of continuation. But again, I'd say that this is more that's why I said that this is this kind of division of this radical and I'd say, you know, public engagement and the oral history on the ground by NGOs, by cultural institutions. And there is no big relevance to scholarly research, I'd say, yeah, especially among historians.
Yeah, but the question is if it was not like a specific Polish case, this boom after the during the 19th, or whether it was a global, you know, like some kind of a trend. If you just remind the Jewish curiosity or interest in Poland during the, I don't know, 30, 40 years, I was stuck again.
Yeah, continue. Yeah, okay.
Yeah, okay. Now, yeah, it's difficult to live, yeah, in Israel nowadays, so that the internet is unstable in my place. So what I was kind of, you know, thinking, maybe it's just a global global trend. If we're talking about Spielberg project and other projects that started to document the Jewish case or the Holocaust, so maybe it's not Polish, you know, like a unique Polish situation.
But I think that it was shifted in time. Yeah, that in other countries it really started earlier. Yeah, so I think that the Spielberg program or other, you know, all the discussions in oral history in 80s, and in 80s, you know, the people from Carta, they never called it oral history. They completely were disconnected with the theoretical background, with researchers, like completely no connection. Yeah, they did it like intuitively. Yeah, that okay, we should do something, but it was not completely connected with the framework of oral history. Yeah.
Okay, I do have one question regarding the political situation nowadays in Poland. And in our discussion before this public event, we talked a lot about nowadays that oral history situation nowadays in Poland. And you told me something that was, for me, it was extremely interesting. That not COVID and not the political situation, the justical reform or overhaul in Poland kind of pushed another boom of oral history projects. But what was the main factor was the Ukraine war. And I was wondering why. And also maybe you can tell us a bit about the new projects that you are kind of connected to in Poland regarding the Ukraine war documenting.
Mm. Yes, you're right. Maybe I should say something like this, that usually, as I mentioned before, that we for all the time we perceived oral history as dealing with the past mainly. Yeah, of course, with connection in connection with the present. As Alessandro Portelli says, but still it was about the past and mostly about the war experiences or communism and so on. Something it was, many years ago, and there was no single idea even to deal with kind of like contemporary oral history, like for example in United States, the crisis oral history. Yes. They did interviews when there was a Hurricane Katrina or 9/11. Yeah, many oral history projects were connected with just events they faced. And when the pandemic started, we had a discussion among oral historians in our associations. Should we do as oral historians something? It's very unusual, new, completely situation. What should we do? Maybe we should follow the trend of other communities of oral historians who started to register live under the pandemic, yeah, and do interviews during that time. And there was a very strong conviction that not, yeah, because we are very connected with the history, and the pandemic is not the history. So this is rather the field of other disciplines like, I don't know, ethnology, anthropology, etc. Yeah, but not oral history, which clearly should deal with the past. And the only thing we did was kind of recommendation how to interview during the pandemic. Yeah, either in remotely or in one face-to-face. But it's not triggered any project connected with the oral history project. And then, as you mentioned, also because you asked me about the current political events, like some strikes connected with some movement, some with the government actions and so on. None of these events created a space for oral history projects. Only, as you mentioned, the Ukrainian war, the topic came back very quickly, and not because we discovered that, oh, now we should do this, but our Ukrainian colleagues asked us, some of Ukrainian colleagues asked, could you help us to start to document and register oral histories of people who are escaping to Poland and stay in Poland, or just move stay in Poland. And this again started the discussion, should we do it as an association? So we decided not to take oral history projects during the pandemic, and why now? And I think that the experience was so strong, I'd say, that they were, although there were some other voices, yes, other voices in the Ukrainian community of oral historians, yeah, because there were some Ukrainian oral historians who said, again, no, it's not a good idea because it's very extreme situation and we shouldn't ask people to give interviews in such situation, unstable situation. And again, this was this argumentation that this is not oral history because oral history is about the past. But in the same time, other scholars, Ukrainian and Polish, said, no, this is our task to do this kind of crisis oral history. Yeah, like Mike Cape and Michael Sloan called it crisis oral history. Yeah, this is also a kind of way of doing oral history, especially when people themselves ask that they want to speak, yeah, and they want to be registered. And this is kind of, you know, bottom from this, the voice from the bottom. Yeah, we want to say something and to be heard and to be registered for the future generations. Yeah, our experience. And exactly, it was the moment we started to think about it. There is a big project in Warsaw. I lost the link, but then I can. Oh yeah, I have it now. Okay. So if I can share, can I share just for a second?
Yeah.
This one. Yeah. So this is this project. Oh, and you can Google it. It's Świadectwa wojny, testimonies from the war. And this is the very comprehensive information about the project. And also, you know, the most important thing was methodology and ethics. So the main discussions, and it was really a lot of discussions about the ethics, how to do it in a good way. And here, for example, just to make it sure, you can read also the ethical recommendations for such projects on our website also. But for example, you know, just to give you some examples, that the interviews are conducted with people who are in a little bit more stable situations. So not, for example, at the main station, yeah, railway station on their way, but for example, they are for some months in Poland and they, you know, manage to start kind of temporary still, but life more stable in their language. So so they choose the language, and we as oral historians are encouraged to really provide the person who can speak in their language, so Ukrainian or Russian or Surgic, yeah, the mixture of languages, just to give them comfortable situation to express themselves as they really want. Another thing is also the team of oral historians or researchers who conduct interviews. They are supervised by psychologists. So this is another layer, and it's completely new situation. This is the first ever project we are engaged where you know, by default there is a supervisor, yeah, who really meet regularly with the team, and every week they really discuss some issues connected with interviews, yeah. So and also this was the start of discussion. It was very interesting because it was start of discussion how much the well-being of interviewer also is very important in this dialogue between two people, yeah, the interviewee and the interviewer. That it's not only, it's of course the interviewee is, you know, the most important in this. So, but this is a dialogue, and we should care about ourselves in a very similar way, yeah. And even it provoked the situation that this project exactly that this year in May, as I mentioned, that every year we do the workshop for all the members of association, and the wish of our members was that let's do the workshop on supervision and about supervision, yeah. And we invited the one supervisor from this Ukrainian project, and also another psychologist. And it was the meeting when some historians went participate in this meeting, and they said, wow, yeah, it's really important, and I really think that I needed this, but now I'm aware that it's really important to include, for example, especially when dealing with some more difficult histories. But even historians, I'd say, for example, from my field, just escaping from oral history, but also when I'm dealing in my research in sexual violence, for example, yeah, also reading sources, written sources, it has influence on me, yeah. And I also had the feeling when reading a lot of stuff connected with, for example, in sexual violence during the Second World War, I felt that I really need someone to talk about it, yeah. And as a historian, I'm not prepared to deal with such kind of emotions and also such extreme violence, yeah. And nobody at university courses taught me this kind of, how I should care about my well-being, yeah. And this discussion, I think, it also started with this Ukrainian project, yeah.
Yeah, it's very relevant also for the projects that under going now in Israel with documenting the 7th of October. But I would like to ask the last question before we will open the floor for the participants, and to ask you if you think and how the new government in Poland will influence the way that you work in your association, and
Actually, I don't know if I'm able to answer this question, because if you follow the news from Poland, I even don't know what happened today, because every day is so exciting, I'd say, in terms of works of parliament. And yesterday they closed TV. They just really closed TV, so there was no signal in TV, in this propaganda TV, and we never know what happened in 1 hour now. So it's really crazy, and sometimes it's a little bit funny, but it's not really funny. Yeah, it's terrifying that it's happening in the middle of Europe, and we are just witnessing this what's going on. Yeah, of course it's great that there is a kind of wind of changes. Yeah, I hope at least that these changes influence, for example, the academia, yeah, and the research, that we were able to really freely do what we really want to research. Yeah, I'm thinking, for example, about my research, like connected with sexual violence and so on and so on. So which is not so, which is very political also. Yeah, but I hope that at least they do not disturb us, I say, yeah. So that we could really do what we want to do, and maybe have some more money for oral history and for doing the it's, I don't know how is it in Israel, but this is the everlasting problem with the money. Yes, sometimes they are money, and this is why I mentioned this problem about archives. That there was a time that we had a lot of money, but only for interviewing. But there was no money for working with the archive, with processing. And we, of course, we were encouraged with this idea that people will die, so we have to record as many interviews as possible. Yeah, and we recorded. Nobody processed it. and there was no money for making transcriptions, to do really, I don't know, management data plan or something then. And then, you know, the archives ended up with thousands of interviews, and nobody knows, you know, until now, I can say an anecdote. I don't know if I should, but this is kind of anecdote, that sometimes when we researchers look for some information, you know, the easiest way is to ask colleague, do you remember, have you ever recorded a person who talked about this and this? Yeah, and still is this idea that we quicker find an information for our colleagues who maybe someone recorded somebody than searching in archive. Yeah, so at least maybe when we submit a project to establish the infrastructure, which is not very fancy thing, yeah, for oral history, they will be accepted. Not only, you know, doing interviews as many as possible, but also to really work on it. And yeah, so maybe this.
Yeah, well, I cross my fingers. I cross my fingers, and I also, you know, have a little pray for us as well. Ronnie?
Thank you both so much. We do have several questions, and I will read one because Shmuel told me that it's really important for him to listen to the recording because he had to leave. So I will read his question, and then we will move to two others that I already saw that would like to pose the questions. So Shmuel asks, what peculiarities and strengths of research oral history of rural countryside areas of Poland?
Yeah, okay. I opened also the chat. Just it will be easier also to follow the questions. Yes, I think that how to answer this question, because now we, of course, when you follow a little bit what's going on in Polish historiography, now we have this, you know, boom of rural histories, yeah, and rural roots of the Polish society, and they are book after book about this legacy, rural legacy of Polish families, but still it is not very much connected with oral history, I'd say. Yeah, so it's very much based on archival sources, but not oral histories. Although I think that they are in our archives, because I myself recorded people, you know, who were living in the rural area. But I think that this is the minority, because most projects, at least in Poland, they were conducted in cities. It's also easier, yeah, when there is an archive in Warsaw. So the most part of interviews are from Warsaw, yeah, and it's very similar to other areas. And of course, there is a huge difference between, I'd say, without any kind of valuing, yeah, the interviews with people from rural area and people from the cities, yeah, that they are shorter, much shorter. For example, we made a very big project in Karta Center for 6 years. We visited Polish people who stayed behind the eastern border, and most of them, like 98% of them, they are living in very small villages just near the border, or somewhere in Belarus, on Ukraine, or in Latvia, or in Lithuania. And you know, it was very difficult to conduct interviews there, because they were like interviews for 15 minutes, 20 minutes, yeah. And so there is a big difference, and I think that maybe this is also the reason why all those historians who now are very connected with this rural movement in historiography, they are still not using oral sources, yeah, because they are very, very difficult, I'd say. Yeah.
Thank you. We have one question from Jacqueline. Are you here?
Yeah. Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Hi, so thank you, Jakub, for your talk. My name's Jacqueline Adams. I'm at the Salamanca. I'm interested in, well, everything you said was very interesting. I'd like to ask you if you could please tell us a bit about recruitment of interviewees, like how difficult or what were the challenges, let's say, with recruiting interviewees, particularly after 1989. I mean, I know it's not the topic you're working on, but is there anything you could enlighten me with this topic, please? Thank you.
Recruitment. I think that it's thank you very much for the question. I think that it's not easy to answer the question because I think that it differs from from project to project. Yeah, there are topics which are not very difficult to recruit people. Yeah, because for example, the very early interviews in Carta Center, because for me myself, I worked in Carta for many years. And I do interviews for the biggest oral history archive, and when we, for example, I don't know, interviewed the former concentration camps prisoners, so we easily could go to one or second association, and then in this association we had 100 people. And at least half of them agreed to give an interview. So they were like a ready group of people, and it was very easy to go to make a kind of group of interviewees. Yeah, so this is one, for example, example. This is one example. Another example, I mentioned this project on the, we called it Poles in the East, the Poles who are living in Belarus, Ukraine, and Lithuania and Latvia. So here during this, we had kind of travels to those countries, for example, for 1 or 2 weeks. And the recruitment was very kind of ethnographic, I think. So we just, driving from one village to another and just walking on the streets and ask people to give an interview. So this is completely different way of interviewing. And another, for example, from my personal research, I researched, like Ronnie mentioned, Polish children born of war. So children born to Polish mothers and fathered by occupiers during the Second World War. And here, for example, the recruitment was in a completely different way, because there is no association of such people, this group of people. And, it's really impossible. It's a kind of hidden population. It's not possible to find someone who had a Wehrmacht soldier father. So the only way I could recruit people was to put a call in media and ask if anybody has this kind of person in family, or knows about something, or knows some stories. And I put to contact an email to me, and only after several months, not just from the beginning, only after several months, some people started to write to me. Yes, my mom had a Wehrmacht soldier father. Yeah, my grandfather was son of Soviet soldier. Yeah, my grandmother was raped by Soviet soldier, and my uncle. Yeah, and it's kind of this way of recruitment. And then in the end, I had a group of interviewees, but it was a completely different way of recruitment. Yeah, so maybe this is kind of just examples. Yeah, but from the project to project, it really looks differently. Of course, it's easier in cities. Yeah, when there are some groups, especially when you are focused on some groups. Yeah.
I see 2 more questions, and so I will give Sharon and then Margalit. And Jakub, I want to ask you to put the links of the stuff that you showed us on the chat if you can, but you can do it after we...
Yeah.
Sharon? You're muted, Sharon.
Okay. So thank you very much for your presentation, because it seems that oral history is really embedded in culture. So it's really interesting to hear how it goes in other countries. But I have 2 questions that you partly answered, so I'll do them very quickly. Is there any main historical event, would you say, in Poland that most of the narratives were, or most of the projects, the oral history projects, were drawn to. Like, let's say, if we can say, generally speaking, in Israel, it's the Holocaust narratives. If we talk about the UK, it's the second feministic movement. So I'm interested to know, that's my first question. And my second question is the opening of the Jewish Museum in Poland. I think it was around 1995. Did it kind of accelerate around it any new projects regarding the Jewish experience?
Yeah. Thank you very much for your questions. I think that if we have a single event, the most I would risk the answer that it is also very connected with the political situation. So, for example, there was a time of this discovery of Jewish histories, but then the government changed, and there was a time to discover. I don't know how to say it in English, but we call them żołnierze wyklęci. So those soldiers who were against communism after the war, and this is the kind of myth of the fortunately past government, Polish government. So, you know, there was a time that everybody was looking for those żołnierze wyklęci everywhere, and just to really interview just from these governmental projects. Yeah. I would also risk that in general, we can say that the Second World War still was the main topic. Yeah. So when we look at oral history archives through in many cities, so at the moment in almost every museum there are, you know, some oral history collections connected with the World War II. So this probably would be the main thing. It is very general because this is, you know, the experience of occupation, but also the experience of the Eastern deportations, the experience of forced laborer. But still, I would frame it like a very generally Second World War, and that's why, you know, even now, this is still. I remember it, you know, when I started my adventure with oral history, like almost 20 years ago, and it was this, you know, this idea. Let's interview as many of survivors of World War II as possible because they will die very soon. And it's still the same idea. Let's interview the children who were living during Second World War because this is the last time. So it's still this, the main focus is on the topic. And I think it will be very interesting, I'd say. In few years, in which direction we will go, but I really don't know.
Thank you.
Thank you. And you said the second question.
The second question was about whether the Jewish, because many times oral histories can be connected to museums and things.
Yeah.
So did the Jewish Museum accelerate or revise projects to do with the Jews in Poland?
I would not say that accelerate. No, they had their own. But you mean the Polish Museum, yeah?
Yeah.
They have their own collection of interviews for their purpose, and they still do interviews. So yeah. So their own connection. But this is also what I mentioned, and it can be problematic. Yeah, that. When there is a situation that, you know, every new institution does their own oral history archives, yeah, and sometimes it's overlaps and it's difficult, so that in many different places they are interviews with the same people, for example, you know, with some, you know, celebrities among witness to history, like, you know, they are some, for example, former prisoners of concentration camps whose narratives are, you know, in many sites, presented, because they are the last one, for example. So this is two-sided, I'd say.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Margalit?
Yeah, first of all, thank you very much for the interesting presentation. My question is about the generational difference. If you, I mean, the people who grew up under communism and the post-communism, and the younger people, now they are not so young, but they grew up after communism. can you say something about the different approach, both of interviewers or oral historians and interviewees?
Thank you very much for these questions. Maybe I would answer in that way. Definitely, it has changed the relation between interviewers and interviewees. Because, for example, like, for example, when we started, like my generation started to do interviewees, there was a kind of situation like most of my interviewers were in the age of my grandparents, yeah, or even grandparents. So this was, for example, kind of this kind of relationship, yeah, that the young boy is going to the very old lady or man and ask about the war experiences. And now I'm in my 40s, and again I'm going to people in different ages. For example, to people who are in the age of my parents. So I see the difference, yeah, of this relationship between interviewer and interviewers. But also I'd say that there is, we started even a discussion on it, that there is a kind of difference in the way of narrating the life in the oldest generations. So, for example, there is a huge difference when I interviewed people who were born in 20s in pre-war Poland, yeah, and the people who were born after the war, yeah, in terms of language, in terms of the richness of the narrative. Usually the main topic, there is a difference, for example, when in these previous interviews, the main topic always was the war, the Second World War, and everything was organized around the war. Yeah, there was life before the war, there was a war, and in very short, usually, it's the less important was the life after the war. Even it was like 60 years, yeah, but it still was like a usually something and for example, when we started to interview people who were born after the war, it's very difficult to find the topic which organizes their biographies. Yeah, they are very different, and people have problems to make narration. Yeah, it's this kind of, I'd say, problems.
But the people had to sometimes to change the narrative. I mean, they had to, probably the narrative they had before the 1989 changed afterwards. So they maybe they were, I don't know if they were critical about the way they spoke in the past, or that's.
Actually, I have no this kind of experience, for example, to compare interviews. So, for example, that we have interview conducted before 1989, and I never did it. So it would be difficult for me to, for example, to compare such. But it will be definitely interesting to for example, to if we have like the projects that somebody came back after, I don't know, 10 years or 20 years, how it looks like the narrative. It will be very interesting to compare. But I'm afraid that I can't answer this question because I don't have this kind of comparison.
Thank you anyway. Thank you.
Thank you.
Jakub, we have 2 more questions, so I suggest that we will collect them and then you can answer. So Sharon and then Jacqueline.
Yes, thank you. You mentioned that concerning Sharon Rappaport's question, that the milestone of the oral history was World War II, and in Israel, as Sharon mentioned, it was also the Holocaust, the World War II, and the Nazi period. And in Israel, after the war, there was several layers of narratives in oral history. The first layer was the story of the heroes, of the warriors, who were the partisans, the people, the underground, the people, the rebels in the ghettos, and so on. And the second layer was the testimonies and the oral history of the victims. And I wanted to ask if you find the same layers, maybe also in the Polish history, and if, because of the Polish history, I would expect that it will be another layer of the perpetrators. So if you can see, I assume that people will not sit and tell what they've done during the Holocaust, but maybe people said something about their relatives or about the family members or neighbors or whatever. If you can find the same this kind of systematic narrative that changes.
So definitely, I would say that the first two groups we can observe in Poland, and they are like go together, I'd say. So the victims and the heroes, yeah, and also it depended on the political situations, who was first, and yeah, but especially that, you know, in the Polish society, you know, there are a lot of people who perceive themselves as victims of the war. So it was, you know, there are so many groups of war victims, and it was very common to conduct such interviews. But I remember, for example, maybe it's not the best example, but it really shows, I think, this kind of tension in recording. Maybe it would be too far to call them perpetrators, but at least people who were engaged in the system, in the communist system. And then in the change time, they were like, you know, and they were heroes at the time of communism, but then the time changed and they were no heroes anymore. And I mean, here the soldiers from the communism, from the Polish People's Army, yeah. When there was a project conducted I don't know, 10 years ago or 8 years ago, it was very difficult even to frame them, yeah. And for example, they were very and even for oral historians who did this project, was very difficult to conduct interviews with them. I remember the discussions, how far they should go with questioning, yeah. And I think that even the book was published about this project, and it was quite a lot of controversies connected with it, because there were so many people who felt, okay, they are old people who really believe that they do something very patriotic, and now they are young historians who come to them and said, no, you are the perpetrator, yeah, because you did this and this. And this is one of the not too many examples of such projects in Poland. And I think that it's still, you know, I would say that there are not too many people brave enough to really touch such topics. And I remember that there were some issues on the presentation of those books. There were some groups who really protested that those historians present the heroes in this bad way, because they show you know, entanglement with communism, and they really do bad things during that time. So this is the project I followed, and maybe that's why I'm mentioning this, but they are not too many, I'd say, yeah. Not too many, but the victims are I'd say that the victims are the first groups, yeah.
Jacqueline, you have the last question.
Okay, thank you very much. Jakub, I'd like to ask you something about analysis now. When in Poland, yourself personally and your colleagues, when you choose, say you have a big body of potential oral history interviews that you could analyze for your particular research question on something or other. Do you do what I'm doing? Do you consider this exaggerated? Do you think that it's necessary to have other primary sources about the interviewee in order for, I'm thinking, okay, well, I'll only analyze oral history interviews with people for whom I have other sources that I can use to corroborate. Is that too cautious in Poland and in your personal approach, or is that acceptable? And I'm really just curious, because sometimes I think I'm being too cautious.
I think this is a very good question, because I think that some historians do this in this idea to do some kind of critical analysis. Yeah, so we have different kind of sources and we critically analyze them. Yeah, sometimes not taking into account that there are some sources like neutral and some like oral histories which are embedded with some ethical dimensions and so on and so on. So yes, I think that there are people who do this and really compare. Yeah. But I would say, and this is the how to say it. And still, if it happens, because it's very rarely that historians use oral histories in their books, yeah, in their research. So if it happens, it is rather in that way. So the kind of critical analysis of sources, no? It's very rarely that, for example, oral history became kind of that the narrative is important, yeah, and it became like a main source, yeah, and we build the narrative of the book, for example, on oral sources, yeah. It's common for reportage, for example, yeah, but not for scholarly work, yeah.
Sorry, but I mean, like, do you trust? Is the attitude in your association to trust oral history interviews, even when there's nothing to corroborate what is said? Do you trust them enough to use them as analysis? You oral historians, what do you think? If you're writing a book or an article.
It also depends how I think that it depends on researcher, yeah, how the single researcher treats the sources in general, for example, yeah. That, for example, it also depends how you use oral history. If it is, for example, under the real names, or if it is anonymized, because there are some people who say, okay, if I anonymize some interviews, I can do more in terms of interpretation, yeah, because I just lose the real person, yeah. It's just the source which is anonymized, and I just compare something, yeah, some behaviors or something, yeah, and it's much easier. But if you can a real name and for example, you have historical sources which contradict, for example, the narrative, it's sometimes difficult. So that's why I'd say that this frame of shared authority for me is the kind of solution, yeah. That and I, in my book, had the situation at least with one interviewee who really wanted to be under her real name, and we discussed, but she was on her side, she was very open to do it. So I showed her what I found in the archive, and we had a discussion. Some things I found they were new for her, yeah. Some of them a little bit, maybe not shocked, but surprised her. But we are in the process of discussing, yeah, what we can agree is the good way to show the thing, yeah. But I think that it's very much connected with the workshop of a particular historian, yeah. Or like the other oral historians who are rooted more in sociology, they even don't have this kind of problem because they anonymize everything, yeah, and they could really analyze like the cultural texts, yeah, like the cases, yeah, which really, at least in their opinion, it helps them to to distance themselves from the people they interviewed. They have just cases, yeah, and tell the story without pointing out the real names, for example. So it really depends. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Jakub, and thank you, Emma. Thank you both for this really, really fascinating talk. And thank you all for being here with us. I wish us all a quiet evening. And see you soon next month. We will meet again.
Thank you very much for invitation, and yes, all the best for you, and please stay safe, and all the best, yeah, from Poland. Thank you very much for invitation.
Thank you very much.
Have a good night. Yeah, thank you. Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye bye.